Well, there's a process. You know?
I know.
It can take a long time sometimes. It's really a blessing for us to be back. I think most of the faces here are familiar, and I guess that means our faces are familiar as well. And that speaks to our long connection with you folks. And that's really been a blessing. We live lives that are really pretty itinerant, and having some connections that go deep, that span some time, helps keep us anchored in a way that we really need. So it's always a joy and a blessing to be back with you all. I think a lot of you have probably heard this story before. So what I should do is have a quiz first, right? See what you remember. Maybe not. So we're Karen and David DeGraaf. I obviously only own one shirt that I wear to church. That's our prayer card shirt. As we start this, I suspect that most of you understand the reason for Bible translation, but that's not a given anymore. A lot of people say, why are you wasting your time doing this stuff? Or that's what you think. So we're going to go through that a little bit, and just a reminder for us. In Scripture, God promises Abraham that all the peoples of the world will be blessed through him. And that's kind of a vague term in English. What does he mean by peoples? Some translations say all the nations of the world, of the earth will be blessed. But this is a theme that is picked up by the New Testament authors quite a bit. Paul says that, picks up the same verse and says that all nations will be blessed through you. And that Scripture saw that God would justify the Gentiles by faith. So in Greek, the word Gentiles and nations is the same word. It means the same thing. And it means the same thing as that term used in Genesis 12:3 in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it's mishpaot. In the Greek, it's ethne. And it designates a group of people who have a common culture, a common ancestry, and speak a common language. So when Scripture talks about the nations, that's what he means. So there are quite a few more nations than there are nation states. The nation state is actually sort of a modern invention. Countries like the United States, or England, etc., didn't really exist until about the middle of the last millennium, or the end of the first millennium, actually. Borders were a lot more flexible, and there were either empires or nations like this. So when Scripture talks about the kingdoms of the earth, that's more or less the empires. But when it talks about the nations, it's these people who have a common culture, common ancestry, and a common language. Paul connects the future, the destiny of Israel with the destiny of the nations. He talks about a full number of the nations coming in to the kingdom. And what is the full number of the nations that will come into the kingdom? It's really all of them. That's what God's intention is. So when Jesus sent his disciples, he said, go into the whole world as a testimony to all the nations. So it's all these language groups, all these cultural groups. And he tells his disciples, go make disciples of all the nations. So it's not just the countries, it's those cultural groups. He says, make disciples, baptizing in the name of the Father. That's a church thing, right? That's what happens in church. You become a Christian and you're baptized. And then you're taught to obey everything that Jesus has commanded. Well, how can people know what Jesus has commanded? That's the impetus for Bible translation. It's making disciples of all the nations. That's why we translate the Scriptures, so that all of these nations can have the same foundation as the church anywhere else in the world. And the good news is, there's another indication of where this comes. It comes through the prophetic writings, that all the nations can believe and obey. Today there are 7,388 known languages, including sign languages. I'm sorry, I should have really asked you this first. We can back up, but yeah, that's cheating. One need that's come to the consciousness of the mission world is how many deaf people there are who can't understand another language, even the languages around them. It's one of the greatest barriers between people in the earth today is deaf people. They're just so much of what goes on around them isn't caught. So there's now a movement to translate scriptures for the deaf, and it's given the technology we have, it's an amazing thing that they can do. But of 386 sign languages, there are only 2 today that have a Bible. So it's really quite amazing. In the world, oh, I missed my quiz again. So this shows that a little less than 10% of the languages in the world have a complete Bible. A few more have complete New Testaments, and others have portions of the Scripture. So that's about, half the languages in the world with some Scripture. There are nearly 1,700 that are spoken by, more than a handful of people and still have no Scriptures. And then another almost 1,000 that are just getting started. And I wonder if this last figure surprises anybody, that 1,000 languages probably won't need a Bible.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Why is that? Yeah. Right. Most of the world is bilingual. Most of the world speaks more than one language. But the things you can understand in your second language are often different than the things you can understand in your first language. So most of the world will learn the language of the dominant culture around them well enough to go to the store, and sometimes well enough to go to school. But the things in their heart often aren't expressed in that other language that they don't know. And there are lots of other things they don't know. A lot of immigrants here from Spanish-speaking countries or Eastern Europe never really get a handle on English that allows them to participate fully in the society here. So those are the kind of people that will need a Bible translation, even though they're bilingual, so they can understand what scriptures are talking about. But for approximately 1,000 languages, a little bit more, people are sufficiently bilingual, or the children in those language groups aren't learning their language. So by the time a translation was finished, everybody who would need it would be gone. So that's the reason for that number. In Africa, there are about 2,000 languages spoken. Yeah.
To say, if there are questions, maybe feel free to ask them, but we will reserve the right to say we'll answer that at the end. We'll have some question and answer at the end, but there might be things that could be answered quickly, like clarification or something. Okay.
Yeah. Do you have a question? So our process started right in this neck of the woods. Don't know if you recognize this. This is like
Never seen him in a suit.
This is Blake's little brother.
I have a question.
Sure.
What happened?
Well, we'll pick up that at the end of the presentation. Yeah.
We have some of Vicky too, but probably not in this presentation, right?
Yeah. What were we thinking?
I don't know.
Yeah. But this is was it 32 years ago at Good Shepherd. We were commissioned to go and do this. So, like I said, it feels like coming home when we're back with you all. We went from the United States, which is up there, to Africa. We originally started working in this country, Côte d'Ivoire. We worked in a group of people right up in the north where there wasn't even a church established yet. And people that didn't know how to read and write because no one had ever written their language. We worked there until a war started in 2002. There was a civil war, and the work was able to continue with the team. You'll see them in a few minutes. But recently we've been living in Cameroon, in the city of Yaoundé. And we'll talk a little bit more about how our ministry has changed over the years. A lot of people think Africa is, huts and things, but it's actually some really big cities. The city we live in right now is officially about 3 million people, but unofficially it's 5 million. Urban areas in the developing world are developing really fast, or at least they're filling up very quickly. Today, there are 5 times as many people living in sub-Saharan Africa as there was in 1960. And about half of those people live in cities now. So there's all kinds of things fueling that. It's the natural population increase, but it's also a lot of displaced peoples, for one reason or another, are moving to the cities. This is, until a little while ago, was the biggest church in the world. It's bigger than St. Peter's, and it's found in Ivory Coast. Surprises a lot of people. So the church has a presence that sometimes is dominant, but it often doesn't go very deep. This is what most people think of. This is the kind of village we first encountered when we began working. This is the first church in the language group we worked with. They had a building program. Look this up. And this is where the beginning of Sunday school. This is with among Inyarafolo people in northern Ivory Coast. And there was almost room for the speakers to stand. But and after a while, the church continued to grow. They built another church, and now there's a bigger one and more people. So it's been an exciting thing to see over the course of 30 years how God has built that church and called leaders. This is the guy we started translating with. His name is Abdoulaye Ouattara, and I think the Arnolds have met him, and maybe a few other people. He and this team worked together with a team of Baptist missionaries that we worked with. The translation process is painstaking and it's long. One of the things you have to do after you translate a passage of Scripture is go make sure that somebody understands what you meant to communicate. So that's part of it that takes a long time. So in 2016, that the translation of the New Testament and the Psalms and the Pentateuch was finished.
18 like that.
I think it was printed in 18. Anyway, we don't have the copy with us, so we got the picture. This is what an Inyarafolo Bible looks like. Would you like to read a passage?
Yes.
Okay. And of course, after that's printed, people need to learn to read it. So that happens, that takes place in a number of different ways. Right now, we work in Francophone Africa. It's the part of Africa that was colonized by either the French or the Belgians. There are 16 countries where French is the dominant language, and that's important because when you're training people, you need a common language to train them in. And in these countries, it's not English, it's usually French. You also need French to talk to the governments. So these are the countries we're working in one way or another. These countries, until about the year 2000, it was fairly easy to work in most of them, except for the one on the lower right, Democratic Republic of Congo. That's been a place where there's been a great deal of unrest for a long, long time. But in the other countries, it was more or less easy. Recently, though, since about 2000, when there was the civil war in Ivory Coast, but since about 2010, things have been falling apart. You've heard of groups like Boko Haram and Islamic groups in the Sahel. They've been attacking not only Christians, but governments, and the areas become extremely unstable. One of the, as instability increases, infrastructure falls apart. So there have been lots of epidemics and other things that have added to the misery of the folks. Right now, these are the areas in Francophone Africa where we can't go because of unrest. So most of it. We can work mainly in the cities, but there are a lot of places where expatriates just can't go anymore. That's the challenge. The good thing is that in the 30 years that we've been working, the African church has grown quite a bit as well, not only in terms of numbers, but in terms of capacity, competence. So one of the things that we're focusing on now is training. This is a group of people who they come from all across Francophone Africa and come to Cameroon for a training course called Ayelta. They learn how to do Bible translation, they learn how to teach people to read and write their own languages, and more and more they're also working in media, using electronic formats to more readily share the scriptures, share the gospel with the people in their countries. We do some more concentrated training as well. This is a group of pastors from a group called the Mambai, who live up on the border of Chad and Cameroon, who are translating the scriptures into their own language. A lot of fun to know those folks. And there are also new ways of getting those scriptures that have been translated into the hands of people, especially those children. I said that the population of the area is 5 times what it was in 1960. That means that half of the population is 15 years old or younger. It's astonishing. And there are actually very few ministries that have focused on the younger people. This is one of the things that's been developed in the last 10 years or so. It takes Bible translations that have been done in these languages and kind of electronically helps teams create Sunday school material. This one here covers the entire Gospel of Luke. It's a 2-year cycle. There's teacher training, and there is Bible verses and a lot of other stuff. So this is not only reaches the kids, but it also equips churches and gives them a vision for ministry to children, which might not have been there before. There are also a lot of other new ways to access Scripture. In the cities especially, the internet is becoming more and more available to people. And they can go to this site and find their scriptures if they're available. Actually, we can go back to that later. Check that out. So any questions about Bible translation and what we've done? And also, we've covered a lot of ground pretty quickly. So I've got questions.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
When you're translating in a different language, is everybody in that population a person who knows how to read?
No, not at all. And that's one of the biggest challenges of Bible translation is how to get those translated scriptures into the hands of people who can use them. So in some cases, the culture is structured in a way that really lends itself to people learning how to read. In other cultures, it's just not the case at all. And there you start with church leaders or Sunday school leaders, and literacy happens much more slowly. But more and more, and as the technology has developed, there are ways to quickly transform the scriptures into an audio format, so that it's a recording thing, and then share those. About 15 years ago, Faith Comes by Hearing know if you know that ministry at all. They developed audio scriptures to use in the developed world. So if any of you had a Bible on cassettes, maybe back in the 70s and 80s, it was Faith Comes by Hearing who first started producing those kinds of things. But then they realized, well, what we have in English could be really useful for all these other languages, especially where people don't know how to read. So they started developing audio versions. And then they came up with a little, it looks like a little radio that you can record the scriptures on and then use them to play. People can go from village to village and play the scriptures in that way, have focused Bible studies. And now you can get the apps on your phone. So it's actually easier to put scripture apps on people's phones and distribute them than it is to print anymore. An exciting thing about Bible translation is that the movement is accelerating. Many, many more translations are being started and completed than ever in history. But the challenge that's created is printing those things. So currently there are 13 languages that have a completed New Testament in Cameroon that are going to have to wait 2-3 more years before they can even be printed, because there's that big of a queue. There's no way to print the Bible or any Bibles in Africa. The entire continent doesn't have a printing press that can handle scripture. So most of the world's scriptures are printed either in Korea or China. And so there's this queue. And then they have to be shipped where they need to go. So there is a partner organization in Cameroon that really wants to build a printing press that can handle scriptures. So that's a prayer request, kind of a dream. We could talk about that sometime. So does that answer your question? Okay. Yes.
So for your iDelta group, if they're coming from all over Francophone Africa, and all of Francophone Africa is red, how does that work? Where do you meet then, and how do they get there?
They can travel. So it's not like all of those red zones are in a state of constant warfare. Those are places that are more dangerous for expatriates like us to go and live.
Okay.
Because we would be an obvious target, either for kidnapping. I don't know if you heard just recently a couple of guys got released who'd been kidnapped for 8-10 years. And so that's the real danger, is that when expatriates show up, and especially if they start living with local Christians, the target isn't only on the expatriates' back, it's on the local Christians. But as you saw from the headlines as well, it's very dangerous, especially along the zip back there. The border called the Sahel, between the Sahara Desert and maybe I shouldn't. I'm just going to go back to the map. There we go. So along this line here, that's kind of the line between Islam and Christianity. And traditionally, the countries up there have been almost 100% Islamic. And even now, a country like Mali or Niger, it's less than 3% of the population that are Christians. It's the same in northern Nigeria and northern Cameroon. So that's kind of, whenever you hear about one of those explosions in the Sahel, in the news, you can be pretty sure that that's where a Bible translation program is either just finishing up a New Testament or is getting started. There's this huge correlation between places of unrest and places where the gospel is finally getting a foothold after 2 millennia. So those are places that it's hard for us to go. It's also dangerous for the Christians who come to iDelta. But generally, the infrastructures of the countries are still functional. So they can go to an airport, get on a plane, and fly to Yaoundé. Yaoundé is kind of is not in the a real turbulent zone at this point, so it's safe enough for people to meet there and to study. But if we went to the north of the country, until 2016, we had people based up in the north, in Cameroon, and that was the year that Boko Haram exploded onto the scene. So we can't go up there and stay for very long anymore. We do some workshops in those areas, but we can't really work there. Yes?
So you guys have been at this since Barry wore ties, so that's but how has it changed since you were there initially and now in terms of, and one of the things I was thinking about, I just read an article the other day that there's more people in Africa now with cell phones than there are in Europe or the United States, 650 million or something.
Mm.
So cell phone usage is exploding.
Yeah.
How is Bible translation kind of mixed with technology? You know what I mean? It's different.
I do.
It's like you said, printing presses aren't there. Are there ways to get audio? And does that even have the ability to go into some of these areas that are shaded in red in ways that you never saw before?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we have friends who are working with Fulani groups. Fulani is a big collection of ethnic groups across the Sahel. And they have Facebook groups where they just share the scriptures that they've been done in Fulani. So, and that, it's for people in a deeply Muslim context, it can be dangerous for them to want to see scriptures. But they can get them off of Facebook, so it's really it's an amazing ministry. So technology's opened up a great many avenues. Like what I was responding to Dave, it is easier to publish scriptures on phones and on websites than it is to do it in print.
SD cards.
Yeah, they can be distributed through SD cards. So that's an outlet that's been developed over the last 10 years. You can have both print and audio on your phone. I gave one of the guards in our neighborhood the Bible the New Testament in his language. And he just has a little feature phone. He listened to the whole thing in a day and a half, straight through. It was,
All he does is sit there all day long, so
Yeah.
it's like, it's a perfect audience.
Yeah. So those are, new avenues that are opening up, a lot of new opportunities. You want to talk about what you do?
Sure.
Yeah?
How much time we got?
Lots of time.
Would you advance it to my?
Yeah.
So quick quiz about how many languages are there in the world? Yes. Oh, photographic memory. Okay. And I think maybe you've been hearing about through all the things that he's been talking about that the translation of Scripture is not just some people sitting down at a desk and going, here's a Bible in Greek or in English or in French, and let's put it into these words in this other language, right? There's all this other stuff about distribution, about helping people learn how to use it. So not just print use, but also oral and audio and things. So that's a huge, exciting area. For me, I do a lot of other things in the background to kind of support the people who are doing this. I used to be part of the translation team when we lived in Cote d'Ivoire and got involved in the language work, and that was really exciting. But gradually I kind of switched roles. So now I am in counseling. I'm the counseling coordinator for SIL, where we work in all of Africa. This is on a timed, I don't want to do that. So how can I stop the time? Time advance. Yeah, I don't know why it's timed anyway. So I do counseling through, and I serve not just Francophone, and when I talk about Francophone, what does that mean again? French speaking, because of the former colonializers. So the dark blue is Francophone Africa, but I also respond to people in Anglophone Africa. So usually that means Nigeria, which is the gray one up in right there, it's Nigeria. Kenya and Uganda, Tanzania, we have some people. And Ethiopia, over here. No, this is Ethiopia, I think. I should learn my geography. I know West much better than East. So helping people who are working in translation efforts in those areas as well. But what that means is not just counseling. So that's me in front of our office in Cameroon, and my former colleague who is now back in the States, so that's why she's kind of X'd out. That looks morbid, but she's still very much alive and kicking, just not with me. So I'm alone. This is our entrance, like a reception area of our office. It's a converted apartment building, so that serves us really well for groups. Try to make it comfortable. This is where the magic happens in my own office. It's a little dark. But, and I work with individuals, couples, families, not just expatriates, but also our Cameroonian colleagues. They deal with the same kinds of things people deal with here. There's stress, there's depression, there's anxiety, sometimes as far as suicidal thinking or self-harm. A lot of our young people go through some of the same things that young people face here. And so helping them in such a different context can be a real challenge, where the support system is really a lot different. Often I do a lot of consultation with our leadership in different organizations. Missionaries always get along with each other. There's no interpersonal conflict. I know that Bob and Carol know that very well. They spend a lot of their lives helping people learn the skills to improve those relationships. I've had the pleasure of working with them a few times in that. And so our leadership team in Cameroon, until April 1st, consisted of the 4 people on the right. Dave was part of it. These are 4 directors, and they're all diverse. Dave is American. The woman next to Dave is from the Anglophone part of Cameroon. The other woman is a Swiss woman. She's our general director, and then the other man is from the northern part of Cameroon. So our leadership is very diverse, which is exciting, but sometimes that means misunderstandings. I've done interpersonal skills training for teams, for consultants, from both English-speaking and French-speaking Africa. And our consultants and our team leaders need interpersonal skills. Often they're given a lot of the academic training, so they can parse a sentence, they can tell you the exegesis of the entire book of Titus, probably memorized, I don't know. But sometimes just getting along with people or helping people solve conflict or helping people through difficult traumatic situations is something they don't have the skills for, they haven't had the training for or the understanding. So that's a big area of influence. So kind of do preventative training rather than just always responding to crises. One of the big things I've been involved in that's continent-wide, it's actually global, is a program that Wycliffe started 22 years ago, called Trauma Healing, healing the wounds of trauma. And so I've done trainings with people at this iDelta course to kind of help them know how to use scripture with some basic counseling principles to help their people who've been through traumatic situations, which is a lot. As we've seen some of the news in Africa, many of them are coming from war-torn zones, from places where there's ongoing conflict, or just plain poverty, disease, famine, a lot of the things that plague developing areas. So helping them learn how to use scripture to help their people through these difficult kinds of situations. I also provide some support for the missionary kids and other expatriate, and as well as a lot of Cameroonian kids that are in these schools now. Primary and secondary schools. So the left is a primary school where a lot of the kids in that mission community go, and then on the right, that's part of the grounds of a really nice high school, and middle school and high school, called Rainforest International School. If anyone knows of anyone who wants to spend a year volunteer teaching anything, even if you're not a teacher, there are positions available, so please, I'll send you the information, but they're really always, every year, looking for staff to support these kids of missionaries who are there because there's schooling for their kids, and they're able to work and stay on the field because there's good schooling for their kids. If the school isn't there, there's really nowhere for these kids to go. They can't go to the local Cameroonian schools, partly because the education system isn't that great, but also because that takes up spaces from Cameroonian kids who really need them. When COVID started in 2020, I was on a part of a team globally that helped develop resources. You know, we were kind of on the fly. There's sound there. On the fly developing tools for leaders as people immediately dispersed and were going all over the world, leaving their areas. And so if I could pause that from going on. Keep going back. So now, and COVID didn't hit Africa as much as a lot of people thought it would, partly because they're already aware of things like pandemics, epidemics, Ebola virus. They have a lot of measures in place already as far as sanitation and information. It did hit Africa, but not as much as I think a lot of people felt it in a lot of Western countries. So for a second, I'll pause and what kind of questions do you have right now about what I've been involved in? That was a big overview.
How much of your counseling is online now?
I'd say probably half. I do a lot online because I do meet with people in Nigeria or Kenya and sometimes people who are, you know, back in their home country for a brief period. I'll keep talking with them. So it makes it really flexible. And it's a blessing. I've been doing that since before COVID and everybody else got on Zoom. So when COVID hit and we were all doing online meetings, that was not really a stretch. That was just kind of, okay, more of the same.
40-minute free sessions or?
Yeah, 50. 50 minutes. I mean, we were at the greenhouse over at Good Shepherd when COVID hit. So we just sat there and kept doing our work kind of in a very pretty place. It was gorgeous. Yeah.
What are your biggest needs?
In counseling or
Just in general for the counseling person.
Another one of me, or someone who can speak French preferably and do some kind of member care, counseling, you know, even lay counseling, that kind of thing. They could come and work with me for a year, for half a year. A school counselor or someone who can work with kids especially would be really appreciated. I go out to the school one day a week, but it would be really nice if they had someone to hang out with them for, you know, 2-3 days, even for just 1 year. Especially someone who has some cross-cultural experience or experience in Africa or experience working with third culture kids. But even without that, I'd be happy. I'm kind of desperate. So, and just someone interested in coming out and visiting for a year. That'd be great. A professional counselor would be great. What else? So we do live in a city, a big city. I just thought I'd give you a brief visual taste of what it's like to drive down kind of the main road that we all sort of live around to see what driving through Yaoundé might look like, our daily life. Yeah, okay. What do you notice? What struck you about that?
No
Not very
line.
much horn honking.
No lines. What'd you say?
Not very much horn honking.
Oh, there is a lot though.
Okay.
There normally is quite a bit, right? A lot of horn honking. A lot of motorcycles, motos, who are carrying many people on the back. They're kind of taxis. They'll just weave in and out. If you've been to another city in Asia or Africa, there's kind of a similar scene. That's just a road we walk down part of at least, 3-4 times a week. We definitely cross it every day, going to work 2 or 3 times. That honestly is the most dangerous part of our lives at this point. We're not worried about crime, we're not worried about, jihadist attacks where we live. That's kind of, can we get across the street every day? So pray about that. We do have colleagues who've been hit by the motos or cars, and things, so.
Which one of you was driving?
Not gonna go there. He actually doesn't drive there much right now because we have to go through this kind of driving orientation and test and be cleared to use one of the vehicles that SIL has. We don't own our own vehicle, we don't own a car, which makes it a lot easier in a lot of ways. That's a big hassle. And we don't have kids there, so we don't need to go back and forth to the school or whatever. So that's a nice feature, I think. We take taxis quite a bit.
Just a question about translation. I hope I can word this right. So since a lot of the people there are not, they can't read or write their language, are there programs in place that Wycliffe has to teach literacy? I'm thinking of Norway, where they teach English and it's the open door to teach the gospel, to share the gospel. Is there something that Wycliffe has in place for that?
Literacy and literacy programs has always been a huge part of what Wycliffe and SIL have always done. So there are people who get trained specifically to be literacy specialists. And then they go and start programs, maybe working with a certain language, and they will work on developing the writing system, on developing reading books, primers, what do you say here, primers? Early reading, maybe for kids, maybe in school, and also adult literacy. So that's usually a huge emphasis.
So it doesn't have to necessarily be through a church, it can be through a school, so any
In any way it works, if people are just kind of looking to be creative, I think that's probably fair to say, right?
Yeah, the literacy is a huge challenge.
Yeah.
When we were coming into Wycliffe, there was this idea that people, of course, are going to learn to read the Bible once the Bible is available. But that doesn't always pan out. So in about a third of the programs, literacy takes off, and it becomes sustainable within the group. And in about a third of the programs, not so much. There's often a core of people, especially in a church, who will make sure that people in the church are still able to learn them, to read and write. And about a third of the programs, things fall apart. After 5-10 years after the missionaries leave, nobody's reading anymore. So, then there are the parts of the population that are living in the big cities or living other places that don't learn to read. And for that reason, electronic media has been a godsend. People who can't read can hear, and then there are programs that have been developed that read along with the learner. So they can download this stuff, and it's almost like follow the bouncing ball, and a lot of people learn to read that way. So it's very, very hard to generalize. There's so many varieties, so many variations. Yeah?
Well, the schools would teach in French if they were going to school, is that correct?
Yes.
But so they would be learning how to read in French? Technically.
It's very hard to learn to read a language you don't speak,
Oh, yes.
and especially speak well. And so the success rate for children who don't come from Francophone families in school is dismally low. So people can learn to read some things, and sometimes it's just like a rote, I can read this sentence, but I have no idea what it means.
And that's the same here.
Yes.
I'm an ESL teacher, and that's Spanish-speaking kids, they're learning to read in the language they never read.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. So it's the kids from the minority groups who aren't from well-to-do families that suffer. They fall by the wayside. So there's also, SIL has developed some programs where showing that if these kids learn to read in their mother tongue, they're going to do much better in French later on. So it's hard to work with those governments. We show them scripture thing. Do we need to wind up? Go ahead. Okay. So this is actually, I'm online, I believe, and this is a site that's been developed to help people find scriptures that's available in their languages. So you can look for the language. Does this work? Oh, there it is. You can look by country. Here it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the language we worked in, that Bible we showed you. So here are all the languages that have scripture in Côte d'Ivoire. And can you search? Actually, I'm going to go back and just search for the language. There's no place to type it in. Really, it's easy. No, I've done it. I have to come back.
The search line, just put it.
There we go. This is, every language has a code. Why is pasta? Oh, it's not, yeah. There's back. Is this a touch screen? Yeah.
No.
There it is. So using this site, you can find just an enormous number of different scriptures.
And video.
And video. So here, it usually comes up on Gospel of Mark, Gospel of Luke. There we go. So this is a Luke film that you can.
Israel pili ni ebelam kwar bepen bekafol mawe bekule chelawe ubaga pa kule chela bara kude di kule chela pile nisite wi ekinge na fakani eli kama telabe ba wetu fola be fuye folie be pile kubeli besi.
So that's what the language sounds like.
Call it the language we'll be speaking in heaven. So it will be learned.
Just so you know.
Thank you, translated.
So we
Oh, here
should
we go.
probably start learning.
Yeah. Go on this out.
Yeah.
Sure seems like your guys' needs has changed a ton over the years. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, I know nothing about AI, but with that coming up, that's gonna have probably a profound impact on what happens for you guys.
Yeah, AI is interesting because it's based on millions and millions of pages of text in a language. That's why it works in English, just because those pages of
But it
text
doesn't
already
work there
exist.
'cause they don't have it.
Yeah, so if there's no, it's kind of this false possibility.
Yeah,
Um,
got it.
This is, so we can also see the printed scripture as well. So this is one of the things, what we've tried doing is just creating a campaign, poster campaign. And you can put the QR code for this site on a poster, and if somebody's got a cell phone that can do that, they can find their scripture through a QR code. So. One of the big challenges we have, though, is as more and more Africans get involved, they don't have supporters like we do. So there is no real tradition of supporting missionaries, especially in Francophone Africa. So that's been a huge challenge. We have fewer and fewer expatriate missionaries and more African missionaries. So finding ways to support that part of the work has been is a challenge that we don't have an obvious solution for at this point. So that's something you can pray for, is how to match the upcoming African Bible translators and administrators and other things with available resources, how to actually make that work. It's a big concern.
That's